The world's two biggest economies are in a standoff, a war fought with tariffs instead of tanks and spreadsheets instead of soldiers. We hear the headlines about diplomatic drama and stock market swings, about Washington and Beijing, about presidents and policy. But that isn't the whole story. The real story isn't just in the halls of power, it's in the price of your coffee. It's in the sudden silence of a factory, or the frantic hum of a new one, halfway across the world. It's in the lives of millions caught in the economic crossfire. This isn't just a trade war, it's a massive shock to the global system, and its ripple effects are reaching every corner of our lives. While the US and China battle for economic dominance, who are the real winners and losers on the ground? It might be a factory in Vietnam that's suddenly booming, or a farm in Brazil that has a surprising new customer. How is this economic war changing your world in ways you might not even see? So, how did we get here? This all started with tariffs, taxes on imported goods meant to protect American industries. But in early 2025, things escalated dramatically. The US rolled out a universal 10% tariff on nearly all imports and piled on more duties, especially for China. China fired back, and soon the two were locked in a tit-for-tat cycle. At its peak, the US had tariffs on Chinese goods that reached as high as 145%, with the average US tariff rate hitting its highest level in over a century. And the fallout hit fast. Economists have warned that this kind of trade war acts like a brake on the global economy, creating uncertainty that makes businesses hesitate to invest or hire. The IMF's chief economist has warned that the world economy will continue hurting from these historically high tariffs. But these big numbers only tell part of the story. The real upheaval is the massive, chaotic, and often painful reorganization of the global supply chain. For decades, the world built super-efficient webs of production. Your smartphone might have parts from a dozen countries, get assembled in China, and be sold in the US. The trade war is tearing that web apart. Now, companies are desperately trying to reroute their operations, which is creating some very unexpected winners and losers. No region shows this complicated reality better than Southeast Asia. For years, countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia were key players in China's manufacturing orbit. When the US first hit China with tariffs, it looked like a golden opportunity. Companies began a mass exodus out of China to avoid the taxes, a strategy called China Plus One. Vietnam especially seemed ready for a boom as factories popped up and its exports to the US soared. But there was a catch. Washington noticed that some of this new trade was actually just Chinese goods being rerouted and relabeled to dodge tariffs. This practice, known as transshipment, put the entire region in a tough spot. Suddenly, Southeast Asian nations weren't just beneficiaries, they were targets. The US began threatening and imposing tariffs over transshipment concerns. For instance, the US and Vietnam negotiated a deal for a 20% tariff, which was lower than the threatened 46%, but it included a punishing 40% levy on any goods found to be transshipped. A similar deal was struck with Indonesia. Now, these economies are caught in a pincer movement. They face US tariffs while also getting flooded with cheap Chinese goods that can't get into America. It's a survival crisis that threatens local industries, forcing these nations to walk an impossible tightrope between their two biggest trading partners. While Southeast Asia is struggling with being too close to the fight, a different story is unfolding across the Pacific. As the US has grown more protectionist, it has created an economic vacuum in Latin America, and China has eagerly stepped in to fill it. When the trade war made it harder for China to buy American farm goods like soybeans, it turned to Brazil and Argentina, who saw their agricultural exports skyrocket. But this goes way beyond soybeans. In 2025, China ramped up its financial presence, announcing a nearly $10 billion credit line for Latin American and Caribbean nations. Brazil alone secured around $4.8 billion in new Chinese investments for infrastructure and technology. China is funding massive projects like a new megaport in Peru and rail corridors in Brazil, designed to reshape trade routes and reduce reliance on the US. It's also pouring billions into the region's lithium triangle to secure the critical minerals needed for electric vehicle batteries, with major investments in Argentina's mining sector. For many Latin American governments, China is starting to look like a more reliable partner than the US, but this growing dependence has risks. A flood of Chinese goods is pressuring local manufacturers. And for countries like Mexico, which are deeply tied to the US economy, the disruption from the trade war is still expected to cause significant economic losses. Even for the supposed winners, the gains are often fragile. The fallout isn't just hitting emerging economies. America's closest allies are also feeling the heat. Canada, whose economy is deeply intertwined with the US, is highly vulnerable to the spillover effects. Studies have projected that Canada could face a significant long-term decline in its GDP as a result of the trade war. Europe is a mixed bag. Some countries might see a short-term benefit, as Chinese goods blocked from the US get redirected to the euro area, potentially lowering prices for consumers. However, this also threatens to undercut European producers. For trade-heavy nations like Germany, the conflict creates immense uncertainty, and even highly integrated economies like Ireland are facing serious pressure, with new tariffs threatening lower-margin sectors that rely on transatlantic trade. The bottom line is that in a global trade war, almost no one gets away unscathed. Widespread uncertainty and scrambled supply chains create a drag on the entire global economy. Even if you aren't in the direct line of fire, you can still get hit by the ricochet. This economic battle is reshaping our world in real time. It's affecting the products we buy, the security of our jobs, and the relationship between nations. The story is still unfolding, and we'll be feeling the consequences for years. So, what does all this mean for you? Have you noticed prices changing for everyday items? Are local businesses in your area being affected by these global shifts? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you want more deep dives that connect the dots between global events in your world, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. So, what's the end game here? The US-China trade war is more than a temporary squabble over taxes. It's forcing a fundamental rewiring of the global economic machine. Supply chains, once built for pure efficiency, are now being rerouted along messier, more complicated paths to avoid political risk. We are witnessing a shift away from hyperglobalization toward what some are calling strategic decoupling. China is racing toward technological self-sufficiency while building deeper trade ties with new partners. The United States, at the same time, is trying to de-risk its own supply chains by pulling production closer to home or to friendly nations. The big question is whether this is a temporary conflict or the dawn of a new, more fractured world. Will we see the globe split into competing economic blocs, each with its own sphere of influence? Or will the sheer cost of this decoupling force the world's two largest economies back to the negotiating table? One thing is for sure, the lives of farmers, factory workers, and families, from the American Midwest to the coasts of Vietnam and Brazil, are now linked to this epic struggle. The real story of the trade war is their story, one of disruption, adaptation, and uncertainty in a world that is changing faster than ever.